All right, scholars. So for this video, I'm going to be modeling how to determine the central idea from a poem using the steps that you just saw in the previous slide. If you feel really confident that you're able to write a 2 to 3 sentence jot for any poem that includes the literal and the deeper meaning, then you can pause this video and move on to the next slide in your deck. But if you would find it helpful to see someone show an example, I'm about to show you and use this also as an opportunity to talk about what is probably my favorite poem of all time, One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. So the first step, because this is a new poem that you haven't seen before, or maybe you have, but we haven't talked about together, is to read the poem all the way through. And because I ask you all to read the poem aloud, I'm going to read it aloud as well. You are welcome to follow along here or mute me for a little bit and follow my cursor and read it to yourself. So here we go. One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last, or next to last, of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Whew. I know you guys might just be reading this for the first time, but I get chills every time I read this poem. I think it's just great. So we've read it once. The first step in determining the central idea is just to look for the literal. In other words, what are the events? What's happening in each of the stanzas? And that's where I'm going to model for you what I'm hoping you'll do, which is when it's hard, actually use your annotations to help you. So in the first stanza, for example, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. She seems to be talking to us, right, to really just tell us an idea that it isn't hard to get good at losing things. It isn't hard to master that. So literal would just be not hard to lose things. Tell me about it. Lose something every day except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places, names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. Both of these stanzas are pretty similar, so I'm going to annotate them only once. And it looks like here she's giving us advice, right? The speaker gives advice for how to get better at losing things. You can hear my fiance singing in the background. I apologize, we have a small apartment. All right, next 2 stanzas. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Oh my God, I literally never get tired of reading this poem. We switch here, right, from giving advice to what's happening here. She's actually describing things she's lost. So the speaker describes things she has lost. And I notice, and not essential to notice this here, but it starts pretty small, a watch, all the way to a continent, smaller to larger. And then finally, the last stanza, which, like, I don't know if you noticed, I got like choked up reading it. I really love this poem. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Here she describes losing a person. And really like the audience of the poem, the person she's writing to. All right. I've got my literal, right? She talks about losing things, she talks about how it's easy, and she gives advice for how to get better at losing things yourself. And that would count for step one. But I also want to ask about, think about the deeper meaning. Why is she writing this poem? Why is she saying it in this way? What is she trying to convey? And one way of thinking about it is like, why would a person ever describe something like this? Or why would a person ever speak in this way? And something you might have picked up on right away is the repetition, which we'll talk more about as a poetic device in a later video. But the repeating it here also, I think, shows that her feelings are more complicated than she's at first giving away, right? She tells us it's easy, and then she keeps talking about it for 5 more stanzas. And I don't know about you, but I feel like when people are like, oh yeah, it's so easy, and then they talk about something like over and over and over again, it's like when someone says like, oh, I'm over it, but they keep bringing it up. She's lying to us or to herself. So if I were to write my central idea jot, which another tip, something else I really recommend, is try jotting it in your classwork where you can go back and forth to look at the poem before you go on to the next slide. That can be really helpful. But central idea jot might be the speaker describes how easy it is to lose things, gives advice for getting better at loss. Ugh, so good. And describes all the things she's lost. And then deeper meaning, ultimately, many descriptions, right, show us that she's not being honest with us or herself. Losing is harder than she admits. It's not perfect. And you might actually have gotten something different out of this poem. Really, the best thing about poetry, like all good writing, is that this poem might mean something different for you than it does for me. And it also might mean something different for you 10 years from now than it did when you read it today. So keep an open mind. And if you had a different conclusion, know that you're not necessarily wrong, just that you read it differently. Hope that this helped. Again, I want to remind you of what we did. We read it all the way through once to get a sense for the poem. We went stanza by stanza, or sometimes chunked the stanzas, and talked just about like what's happening in this, and then asked ourselves, why is she describing the events in this way, and made an inference. I think it's because she's lying to herself or to us, but you might have thought something different. On the next slide, you'll have a chance to see some central idea jots from other scholars, and hopefully you find those helpful as well. But what I really want to stress is that a central idea jot that only describes the literal or only describes the topic of a poem is really incomplete. So push yourself if you can today to be even more descriptive with what you write. Hopefully you loved this poem, maybe not as much as I did, but hopefully you loved it at least a little bit, and I'll see you on the next video.